Hello, founders. We know that many of you are wondering, how do I optimize the fundraising process for my startup? Well, today's session is just for you. My name is Shuo Chen. I am a former founder, now investing in founders and teaching founders at Berkeley and Stanford. And I'm also a board member here at Decode, the largest tech and entrepreneurship community that's hosted between Berkeley and Stanford. And today we'll be answering one of our top questions from founders in our community, all about how to optimize the fundraising process. So without further ado, I want to dive right into the 3 tactics that we have for you today. So first tactic for optimizing the fundraising process is stacking investor meetings strategically. Oftentimes, founders will approach the fundraising process as reaching out to all investors and scheduling people at their earliest availability. But really, the right way to think about this is that the order in which you're taking these meetings is actually highly important. Generally, you want to condense all of your investor meetings into a very focused 4 to 6 week sprint so that you can get this done in a condensed period of time and get back to building. And you also do this to make sure that you line up all of your investor conversations so that people have to have a deadline to give you a final yes or no. And of course, as you're starting to schedule these meetings, you want to start with investors who you believe are more likely to say yes and commit right away. These are people that perhaps you personally know better, have more of a relationship with, or have a really warm intro to. That way you get early wins in this process and you have them start to anchor the entire fundraise that you're putting together. And then next you want to move to investors that you don't know as well and that you don't maybe care as deeply if you get a no. The reason for that is that helps you practice your pitch and refine this. Then you want to end with, the most top investors that you're super, super excited about and really want in your round. And you do it this way so that you get some early yeses so you can cite some traction in your round. And then, middle is practice sessions for investor meetings where, still you would be bummed if they say no, but they're not your highest priority investors. And then you end with the best investors. So timing these partner meetings is incredibly important because oftentimes within funds, investors will get together for investment committees or partner meetings to discuss which one they're going to move forward with. So you want to make sure to think about the timing of that as well on when to kick off all of these meetings overall. And that leads us into our second tactic. Double clicking on one of the points that we mentioned briefly earlier, in addition to stacking these meetings, you really want to use earlier meetings to help you refine the pitch. Remember how the 3-phased approach of, talking to investors who are most likely to say yes and then talking to investors, that it wouldn't be the end of the world if they said no. You want to leverage these early to middle meetings to help you refine your pitch. You want to get familiar with your numbers and exude a lot of confidence when you're asked tough questions. For example, you might be able to answer very specifically between a certain range when you're questioned about a specific metric of yours, let's say retention. And then, of course, during this process, you want to use words like when instead of if when you talk about the future of the company. So that way you sound more confident about how things are going to turn out. And then, of course, you want to run a tight feedback loop so you can apply the feedback you're getting from investors to constantly improve your actual pitch, your actual product, and just proactively address any concerns they might have. And of course, as you're running through this process, if you're getting no's from investors, always follow up with a very polite why and ask for feedback so that you can leverage that to continue to improve your pitch. And that leads us into our third and last tactic for today, which is you want to start with a lower ask. The fundraising process is oftentimes binary, where you either end up with a round very oversubscribed with a lot of interest, or you never manage to close a round. And so you want to make sure that you present a smaller supply, as in you're not raising that large of a round to begin with. So by being able to say something like we're raising $2 million and already fully subscribed is definitely better than saying we're raising $4 million and only halfway there. So if you start with a smaller round, you can always expand the smaller round and say, hey, we're actually going to increase the round by a little bit because we've gotten so much interest instead of just targeting super high. Of course, the goal here is to also increase the ask strategically. So you can always go back with, I know I said I'm raising $5 to $7 million, but we're actually going to end up raising about $7 to $8 million based on demand. And so that way you can signal, again, a lot of excitement about your round and create more FOMO or fear of missing out among investors. But of course, keep in mind that in this process, you don't want to raise too much money either because this is some of the most expensive equity you'll be raising. This is the most expensive equity you're giving away because you're earliest in your round. You haven't validated as much as if you were later and had even more metrics to demonstrate. So just raise enough to last, 2 to 3 years. Right now, we're seeing rounds average about 3 years of runway for the startup. And of course, this 3 year of runway leaves some buffer space. So you're not saying, hey, I have exactly 3 months of runway. You're leaving about 3 years of runway with maybe 10 to 20% buffer space in case you need extra if anything unexpected comes up. So with that, we've covered the 3 tactics for how to optimize a fundraising process. 1, stacking investor meetings strategically. 2, using earlier to middle meetings to really help you refine the pitch. And 3, starting with a lower ask. And with that, if you want to learn more about other traps to avoid in this process, as well as tools that you can leverage, please feel free to check out the full newsletter linked below. And of course, as always, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions that you want us to cover in a future session. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Take care.